Welcome to another edition of We Are the Watchmen Weekly. I'm R.C. Williams.
And I am Julianna.
Julianna, it's good to be back, huh?
Yeah.
We had a couple of weeks where we had incredible Watchmen Brief episodes, including the one last week with Randall Terry and Stephen Broden.
They were amazing, weren't they?
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, the title really kind of said it all, Murder of the Unborn.
When you've got two men, a black man calling the black church and the white man calling the Catholic church and saying, you know what? If you're murdering the unborn, you are not a Christian. You need to rethink what you're doing and whatnot.
Yeah, and I give them a ton of credit. They've come up with a very creative way to get ad messages out at the lowest cost possible to the largest audience possible, right? Because their candidacy for the Constitution Party, they use to push an anti-abortion, pro-life message nationally. And their ads ended up on The View and ABC and stuff like that. So it was a great episode. If you haven't seen it, go back and watch last week's episode. It is completely worth it, 1,000%. So Juliana, for this week, there was an interesting story. And for those who don't know, we've got watchmenaction.org. That is our ministry. We equip the church to engage the culture, do all those great things. We also provide the news each week for the U.S. Christian Chamber of Commerce newsletter.
We do.
So we pull the stories that are trending in the Christian headlines. This one caught our eye so much that we had to share it. So let me get the big board up here.
It really represents us and what's going on and why we're doing what we're doing. Right?
It certainly does. Let me just full screen out here. So we're full screening as much as possible. Do that. My arrow is here somewhere. So what happens when you do it. Okay. So the headline from Religion Unplugged. This is an interesting source. So after years of decline, share of U.S. Christians stabilizes. Now at the headline, you're like, that sounds like great news. But as they always say, the devil is in the details. Right? So let's give people kind of a high level of what this is, and then we'll talk a little bit about it. So here's the headline out of New York. While the Christian share of the U.S. population has remained relatively stable in recent years, the country's religious composition continues to evolve. For the first time in decades, they had a new study from Pew Research, and it said that the proportion of Americans identifying as Christian has apparently stopped its long-term decline.
Right.
And is now holding steady at 62%. Meanwhile, the number of religiously unaffiliated individuals, atheists, agnostics, I guess, whatever, is still high, but it's leveled off after decades of growth. And then this quote from Greg Smith, who's the Associate Director of Research, is pretty telling. It's very striking to us to observe this recent trend in stability over a long period of decline. So interesting as you look at it on the surface, you say, man, are we actually on the right track?
Well, at least we're getting off the wrong track.
Yeah.
Right. Because the Christianity was declining and we had other religions and whatnot that was really coming, to fruition where people were really looking into that. And a lot of people just left the church altogether. The article is talking about how people are considering themselves to be, Christians or religious, right? But they're not going to church and they're not, affiliating with any of the different denominations.
Right. So as you go down a bit, because I want to get to that, because you had a great comment. We were talking about the decline. I think that this graphic really shows people where we're at. So if you look at the bottom, you can see the years, and then you can see where we started in 2007. 78% of U.S. adults identified as Christian. Then we had this slope.
Yep.
Right. And then they went from end of telephone-based surveys to surveys conducted mainly online or on paper. That was 2020. And we can see it dipped a bit more, and then it started to move again. But when we write, our goal is to equip the church to engage the culture.
Correct.
And we talk a lot about what do you say to the person who is lost or seeking? Because the answers are in Scripture.
Right.
But as our friend Cameron McGill in North Carolina says, you may be the only Bible some people ever read.
That's right.
What are they going to get from it? How you present the gospel is critical.
Very critical.
Right? And this is pretty telling of that. So as you read this and you say, wow, this is good news, I'm ready to go talk to somebody, be very conscious of how you do that.
Exactly.
Right? Okay, so let's see. We had some breakdowns here. So this one was also interesting. A large majorities of U.S. adults believe in the existence of a soul, something spiritual beyond the natural world. So it was interesting to read some of these responses. So the percentage of U.S. adults who say they believe in people have a soul or a spirit in addition to a physical body, 86%.
That's high.
That is high.
That's very
That's a
high.
good thing,
I was very surprised when I saw that.
right? In Father or a universal spirit, 83%.
Right.
Okay, we're doing all right. There is something spiritual beyond the natural world, 79%. Okay, right? And then an afterlife, heaven, hell, or both, 70%. I mean, but the net in the belief of one or more of the above is 92%.
Mm-hmm.
So this is trending in a positive way. If you were to use this in talking to somebody, you could say, look, there is a trend that people believe.
Finally.
Finally,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we're on the right track. Let's continue through here. So it talks about the majority hold spiritual beliefs, but here comes the but.
The gap.
And it's the age gap. This was also pretty telling. So, Julianna, I mean, what did you think about this when you look at the ages and the percentages?
Well, I was really concerned because the older generation were very into, their spirituality and believing in Father and whatnot. And the younger they became, the less they identified, as, being a Christian and praying and, going to service and participating, within the body of Christ. And
Yeah.
so the disparity between the older generation and the younger generation is quite huge. So now we're looking at the older generation. What are we going to do to help the younger generation really have that faith in Father and doing what it is that they need to do? How are we going to help them be able to grow spiritually? Because obviously we dropped the ball.
We did. We did. So one of the things that stuck out to me here is they asked a number of questions you might think of. Identify as Christian, okay. But when we got to the praying, attending services, and religiously unaffiliated, the question I didn't see that I would have been interested in seeing is why young people stopped. Right? What happened there? Because we've asked that question of people and we've gotten some very interesting answers. Most say that the idea of religion takes away from the belief system.
Well, I think that the church also has walked away from the people.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have an organization that's become disconnected, or they have a view and they're looking at doing church the way they want to do it, not the way church used to be.
Right.
Because church used to be the center of our lives in the
Right.
50s and 60s. Everything was revolved around the church. Now it's like, where's the church? Right. And if you're not in the culture and you're not impacting, why would the kids be interested?
Exactly. It's like the old us four and no more.
Mm-hmm.
Church happens inside the four walls. Neither of those things are true.
Correct.
The reality is that everybody who's in is already in.
Right.
You've got to be concerned about the people who are outside. And according to this, that appears to be a majority of young people.
We haven't, the church abdicated its role. Again, the church used to be the center of our culture, used to be center of our communities. And when the church stopped being open and, really doing for the young children, because they were always focused on the teenagers and whatnot. There was always youth groups going on. I was raised in the Catholic Church. There was nothing going on. Mm-hmm. There was nothing to be able to participate in. So, I mean, the Catholic Church completely abdicated its role within the community. So if we want to, get back to the young kids, we need to have church.
Yeah, certainly. And I mean, some of this plays out here, like they broke it down a bit more: pray daily, attend religious services. We'll link to this in the story this week, so you can read this report on your own time. But what I found interesting too is that column in the middle here that says, believe in God with absolute certainty. Isn't it interesting how that goes, right? So people can identify as Christian, but when you get to the nuts and the bolts of it here and here, isn't it interesting how it drops? When the rubber meets the road, right?
What's the difference between true Christianity and a cultural Christianity, right?
Spot on. That's good. That's good. So let's continue. We talked about the generational divides, but I want to get to something, and they talk about this. You had talked about, I think, political ideology, or there was something in here with political progressives.
So I thought this was really interesting. That I'm going to read it. Politically self-identified political progressives are now less likely to identify as Christian with only 37% of them identifying as such, a steep decline from 62% in 2007. Can you imagine 62% down to 37%?
Wow.
So, in contrast, political conservatives continue to maintain a high Christian affiliation, though their shares has decreased from 89% to 82%. So, if you're conservative, you're much more likely to, have a belief in Father and pray and go to church and whatnot. But the progressives on the left, how do you go from 62% of the people were, believing and praying down to only 37% of them? Well, then you see all the stuff happening within the left and what they're pushing for, transgenderism and child mutilation and all these other things. It's like, oh, no wonder those types of things are happening, because there really aren't the Christian beliefs in the progressives on their side.
Wow. So not that's very telling, and I wonder in some way, are the people who account for that gap, because those people had to move to do something else,
Mhm.
and maybe they didn't necessarily move uh, to be fully politically conservative. Are they just sitting somewhere in the middle? And let's say, because we're politically conservative, we're obviously Christian or believer conservative, are they waiting, like we see many of the times for the people in the middle, are they waiting for someone who they agree with to come and make it make sense for them?
I don't know, but I think that they're at the point where, no, yes, I would
Yeah.
have to agree then, right? Because it's like, this big, I don't know, I don't understand. There's this confusion. And when there's confusion, people back up
Right.
and they don't engage because, there's got to be the clarity. So you're right.
Yeah, I think the other one is interesting too, and then we'll move on here, is that when you draw a line in the sand, it's the tribalism that we talk about when we do like Close of Business or our other shows. We talk about being very careful about tribalism. And it's not that you don't draw a line in the sand to say this is Father's word. That's a thing,
Right.
right? But when you're not willing to even explain your position or help someone who wants to agree with you to understand, then what incentive do they have?
It's interesting. I wrote to a girlfriend of mine this morning and I said to her, you would cry if you understood what I understand and
Mhm.
how much lies are out there. And I was like, because I cry. Because people are just, they're so misinformed, disinformed. They don't have the authorities, in front of them saying, here's what the scripture really says. Here's what biblically we need to understand. So in that lack of having that leadership, they just, opt to not be partake in it.
Right.
When they're seeing it as a negative thing because, there's so much infighting, there's stuff that's going on that they're like, hold on a second, and they're not involved the way that they should be.
And that's the right? Because if you
Yep.
think about that from a biblical perspective, that's a soul that potentially ends up in the wrong place.
Correct.
And on Judgment Day, you're going to be called to account for what you didn't do.
Look how many people have been turned off politically. Number one, look how many people have been turned off by the church. Number two,
Right.
let's look at how people are just being turned off, generally speaking, because of what's going on culturally. And they're throwing up their hands and they're going, well, I don't even know how to participate and I don't believe in any of this stuff. So I'm just going to become reclusive and not engage. And I think that's what we're seeing is a lot of people are not engaging in what needs to happen. But yet everything that we've done with Watchmen Action and the workbook that we've written, it's all about we've got to engage. Right.
Yeah.
So the fact that we're seeing the issues that we're seeing right now is because we haven't engaged the way that we need to.
And Juliana, so you bring up a great point, and this is what we wanted to do. So you talked about Watchman Action. We've built an entire curriculum specifically to address this type of thing.
That's right.
And believers' involvement civically in the issues that matter to them most.
Well, I think the church is finally starting to really wake up to the fact that they're not engaged.
Right.
It's time. I mean, it's time to sit back as a Christian to be able to say, Father told us to take territory.
Exactly.
Right. And obviously, when you go from the progressives and believing 62% believed and prayed and whatnot down to 37%, we abdicated. Now it's time for us to, what do we need to do? And how do we get engaged? And how do we do the things that we need to do? Watchman Action helps with that.
So what we'd like to do, guys, is actually walk you through a mini module of Watchman Action training, because your key to victory in situations like this is to tell the story effectively the way that Father and Yeshua would want you to tell it.
Right.
They'll give you the words if you're positioned correctly and you know what you're doing and you actually commit the time to do it. They'll help you, because
Right.
that's what this is all about, right?
Exactly. I mean, we all have a story that we need to be able to help each other.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. So this training module
Mhm.
is just under 20 minutes. We're going to go to it, and then we'll come back at the end and we'll talk a little bit more. But you guys enjoy this for now. Let me go ahead and get this added to the stage. Let's get this started. Hey, welcome to the Watchmen Action Training Module. I'm RC.
And I'm Julianna.
Well, you're here. You've engaged with Watchmen Action. You've gone and joined the Watchmen Action community. You're like, I'm ready to learn, guys. I'm ready to become an ambassador. I want to set up my own Watchmen Action chapter. This is episode 0, so to speak, for you. So in these mini modules, our goal is to get you the information that is in the Watchmen Action training curriculum in a way that you can quickly and easily understand. So we'll give you some context and then make it easy for you to practically apply it. We use real stories about real things everywhere possible so that they're relevant and relative to you. Take what we do, take the understanding, apply it to your story. This is what the workbook is for. There are areas in there for you to write and type and learn and work with others. So we encourage you to watch this as many times as you need, and please take advantage of the digital or physical version of the curriculum to help with the issue that you want to champion. So, Julianna, I think I've done enough on the front talking side. Let's get into some brass tacks, huh?
Awesome.
All right. So this is Watchmen Action Mini Module Training 1. As you know, it is the battle plan to get things done. So let's start here. Within the Watchmen Action Training Express Pack, it's interesting. We've taken the entire curriculum and we've broken it down into moving parts. So in this training, we're going to cover the telling your story portion, right? Owning the moment here. And for more information on any of this, you can just jump into the Watchmen Action community. If you go to watchmenaction.org and click on community, it'll take you straight to it. And then you can go to our teaching module section and catch anything that you may have missed or the additional information that you want to find. So let's talk about it. Key 1, engaging others by telling your story, the most personable thing that you can do, right? So in our training, for every single section, we have one essential question that sums everything up. For engaging others by telling your story, it's this: how can I leverage my personal experiences to move the needle, as Juliana says, MTN, or I should do it like you, MTN.
I do it like that.
Yes, you do. And that's a good thing because we need to move the needle.
Yeah.
So how can I leverage my personal experiences to move the needle on an issue that I care about? It all starts with this: your story, your personal testimony on a particular issue is going to be the thing that moves people in your direction and really gets them fired up with the desire to take action. So where did this come from? Logical question. Glad you asked. Thanks for asking. In our research, Harvard professor Marshall Gantz came up with the story of self. And there's a model to telling your story in a highly effective and highly efficient way. That model covers 3 things: challenge, choice, and outcome. Now, there is no written test on this, but these are 3 keys that you're going to need to remember: challenge, choice, and outcome. We'll come back to that in a second. But let's read on the screen together here for a moment. The story of self is a framework you use to talk about your personal experiences in a way that can inspire others to relate to you, find common ground, and potentially join your cause. Remember, good storytelling is visual. What's the setting? What are the relevant sounds? What are the smells? What are the colors? If you've ever listened to a really good ebook or story, James Earl Jones is well known in his life for reading the Bible. It's a very different experience if you're reading the Bible or you're listening to him read the Bible, because he sets the context for you and gives you a visual of the story that you're listening to. Also, you need to have a clear beginning, middle, and end, and a tone that creates the emotion appropriate to the tale that you're telling. You cannot tell a super passionate and fired up story sitting like this and talking about what's going on, because it won't work, right? You wouldn't watch this if Juliana and I weren't who you've come to know, whether through our writing or watching us on the TV show or doing a training in person. If we weren't those people, none of this would make sense. We would not be able to train you on how to tell an effective story if we weren't authentically ourselves and able to frame it and give you context. So from the workbook, we pulled directly. Here are the 3 things broken down with a bit more detail. So step 1, the challenge. When you're thinking about building your story, what hardship or obstacle came into your life that disrupted life and put you at a crossroads? Now, I don't want to spoil things, but Juliana is actually going to tell us a story about how our community town hall, the lab model, actually came about. So she's going to do an actual example of the story and building your story taken from the workbook and the instructions.
So when I was a kid, my challenge was I was a really smart kid, but I didn't have a place to be able to go be seen and go be seen by adults who could be, mentors to me. So when I became an adult, I realized, hey, you know what? If we had a location where we could have community get togethers and talk about what's happening and see the children, right? We'd be able to really make an impact in our community. So the outcome was making an impact in the community. It was, opening up a lab and being able to say, I was a kid like these kids sitting out here, right? And they needed to find a place to be seen and a place to be able to find the mentors. And we were able to do that. And I'm so glad that I did that, because even as an adult, right, I needed to find like-minded people. And I was like, okay, where do I find all of my people?
Yeah, so
Yep.
it is interesting that notice that didn't take hours and hours for Juliana to describe. She
No.
talked about the challenge or the hardship, right?
Mhm.
How did you get here? You were in a situation basically where if there had been a lab, things would have turned out differently in your life as a young person, right? That is a distinct challenge that we can all relate to. So as you're framing the story that you want to tell, come at it from that perspective. If things were better when you were younger, share that and share why, because you're setting the stage for someone to understand why it is no longer that way, or how it ended up not being that way and how what you did contributed to it returning to that or being better then it's choice, right? What was the fork in the road? You really made a declaration where you said, I'm not going to let this happen to another young person.
Correct.
I am committed. I am all in on solving this problem. And the way that we do it is we return to a town hall style
Yep.
that is in the center of the community.
That's right.
You tell the story when we speak about General Thomas Gage of the British military and how one of the things he did during the Revolutionary War is the first thing he tried to stamp out was town halls.
That's right.
Because the Patriots used those town halls
That's right.
to meet. And our friend Bill Federer, who is an incredible historian and trainer, talks about when the Pilgrims came over, in addition to the Mayflower Compact, common people making an agreement on how they were going to self-govern.
That's right.
They had a town hall in the center of town, which is where the town handled their business. And it was also the church, right? So why do you need 2 buildings to do things? Well, that's what happens when you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. That's another story for another time. But the reality is this, that the town hall is so important to the fabric of a community that our enemies tried to eliminate it as the first thing they did to break our will. So you making that choice is everything.
Well, think about the first real capital. Was it the capital was in New York?
Correct.
Was about 7 blocks from my home. That was the town hall. That's where everything happened. Right. So the fact that we don't have that, well, I saw that as being an issue, because there are things that are happening in our community that if we're not coming together and talking about it, right, we're going to continue having the issue. So that was what was pulling on my heart.
Interestingly, on choice, and this ties back to a New York, or I'm from San Francisco. People think of New York as just one giant city, but New York is actually 5 separate boroughs, and in essence is smaller than what people make it out to be.
Correct.
Which is the importance of what you're talking about with a town hall. New York at that time was small. It didn't have skyscrapers and all of this other stuff. And the town hall was the core of
That's right.
everything that happened.
That's right.
I think this is important for people when they're visualizing their story. Notice what we did. We talked about the importance of a town hall, then we connected historical reference, then we connected a place where you're from. So now it's very real. And then you gave us context that most people would have had no idea about until you said it. So, the first capital was New York City. That was Brooklyn.
Yes.
My bad. Sorry, boroughs.
Yes.
And then you said that was 7 blocks from my house.
Yes.
About 7 blocks from my house. Just that example, if you're building on your story, see how you can build these blocks and you have these extra pieces.
That makes it real.
It does. It does. And you don't have to use them all at once. But the more that you have in your stable of things to use, depending on your conversation, can be incredibly valuable. So let's talk about the outcome. So you then said, I applied my situation and my decision or declaration in real life.
Correct.
So the action that I took is I recreated that place in a community that needed it. And then I told my story about the reason that I did it. And the outcome was, in my eyes as well, very surprising. In a place where you would think that young people don't care about these things,
They did.
They did.
They sure did.
And they were hungry for it.
Very high.
I was blown away. But that outcome is important, right? So you've set the stage, you had your declaration, and then wow, real tangible results in the outcome. We've told that story to people over and over again and have garnered support for the lab model because of your story.
So let's describe with the next slide how we actually got there. I mean, because you're looking at my story, right?
Right.
And then it goes to, I talked about the settings and the sounds and the colors and the emotions and the atmosphere, because that's really important to me.
Yes, it is.
Because that's something that I didn't have, when I was growing up, and it meant something to me. And even as an adult, I was looking for my people that were like-minded, and you don't necessarily find them at church, and they could be at church, right? But most people go there just for the service and then they run out. But I wanted a community space, right? And then, my choice and what was the defining event? Oh, I can remember my defining events. So Alan brought me to the location. It was like, Julianna, look at this 2,700 square foot location. What would you do with it? And I was like, oh my gosh, what I would do with it. I got so excited in what I could be able to do with it, right? So, that's part of telling my story and, being able to move people with why the lab is so important. So the next part is I'll let you continue teaching it.
Yeah. So Juliana set a stage where if you close your eyes and listen to that story, you could put yourself
in that story.
We've talked about the beginning, middle, or end. One of the things that I want to talk about, because we've also talked about the obstacle or the defining event, is a binary or complex choice. Now, that sounds more complicated than it actually is. Was it a 2-step process to make the choice? Did you make a declaration, or was it more complex where you had to go to other stakeholders, or maybe you had to negotiate something? Because there was a component of that in our story.
So we negotiated big time, right? Because we had an outrageous rent personally, and we had just signed the lease for the lab, and boom, COVID happened. Boom, you got furloughed, right? So boom, everything landed on us, and we were like, what do we do? And we chose to continue with the lab, and we chose to downsize where we were living substantially to be able to afford, maintaining the lab, because we knew that without community, sure, we can continue on and do what we needed to do for, just ourselves. But we really needed that community heartbeat. And I was holding on to my dream. And I was like, there's no way that somebody's taking this away from me. So that was the binary choice that we had to make.
Yeah, it's interesting that you go through that process, and as people watch the training, and at this point you're thinking about your story, see how many subsections are in there. And in future modules, you're going to learn where and when to place those. When we get into the human action model later, you'll get a chance to see how and when you place those stories, and then how you position yourself to get other people to tell the story. The moral or the lesson of it, when you think about it, is be bold. Like, you're in order to do great things, you must be willing to risk or sacrifice a lot and do things in an unusual way.
So I guess for me, what made it so worth doing it, this is what wound up happening. So the city of Orlando was paying the salaries of the teenagers. They were all 16, 17, mostly 17-year-olds, right? And they were paying the salary for the kids to work for us. Well, I was able to do personality profiling on them. I was able to see where they wanted to go in life as far as career was concerned. I was able to connect them with the right mentors that they needed to have. I was able to have all these different business, we always say me, but we were able to do all these business meetings where the kids were able to be involved in, where we're talking about cryptocurrency or gold back whatevers, and being able to pour into them that which I wish I would have had when I was a kid. So I mean, the outcome was, it was worth the effort.
Yeah. Julianna, you bring up an interesting point. You say, I always talk about me, and it was we. I think there is something, though, to the passion from which, and the position from which you tell that story, where it being okay, saying I did, is a great lesson for folks who are engaged in this training.
Well, I really needed it. What I needed to have developed to be able to have the outcome of what little Julianna needed when she was a kid, or the Julianna that was building a technology company, didn't understand, and was looking for a community of people. So
yeah, it's really important, because that personalization and that passion is what sells. You can have the best idea in the world, but if you are not passionate about it, or you cannot give context to it, it doesn't matter how good it is. People will not follow. They don't get it. It doesn't connect or resonate with them. And that a lot of times gets lost. And that's one of the problems that we are solving with the Watchmen Action curriculum. You're not going to be here for 17,000 hours in a row, going through step after step that doesn't lead you to a conclusion that you can actively use right now. We've been at this just a few minutes, but you've got pretty much everything you need to start to craft your story. So as we land the plane on this mini module, 3 things, 3 keys to victory within the model. Challenge, you have to convey the challenge. The choice, what was your declaration? When did you plant your flag and say, this is the moment for me to make this choice? And then by doing so, what was the outcome? Was it positive? Great, happy ending to the story. Did you learn from it, and maybe it wasn't so positive? People appreciate that, because nothing is perfect, but be genuine in the outcome, and then look forward. Right? So guys, we hope this was helpful. This is module 1 of Empowered to Act from Watchmen Action. We are so excited to be able to work with you in this way and other ways. Listen, for all things Watchmen Action, start with the website, watchmenaction.org. That's watchmenaction.org. You can click on community, get signed up for the Watchmen Action community, get all the information, including all the teaching modules and the materials you need for you and your crew there. Until next time, we'll see you soon.
Whew. That was so cute.
Yeah, I know, right? So you guys can see that you can take the story that we covered in this edition of We Are the Watchmen Weekly and put it to work right away. Juliana, great job.
Oh, you too.
Yeah, explaining the lab model.
Oh, thank you.
I think that when you personalize these things, no test, no testimony.
Right.
You're put through what you're put through by Father and by Yeshua so that you have a testimony to share with someone who is also searching for reason and looking for
Amen.
solutions. So I think we can land the plane on this one.
Let's do that.
Yeah. Guys, thank you so much for joining us for this edition of We Are the Watchmen Weekly. Okay, to find everything, including the We Are the Watchmen Weekly newsletter ripped from the headlines and all the other information, go to watchmenaction.org. It's plural, watchmenaction.org.
Also, to receive
Oh, yes.
your free half gold back.
Yes. Goldback Inc. is a proud sponsor of We Are the Watchmen Weekly and Watchmen Action. We want to give you free gold in the state of Florida. You'll find it on the site, as Juliana said. Guys, thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you soon.